OCO, Victoria O'Keeffe, Dawado. Hello, my name is Victoria O'Keeffe. I'm a Cherokee Nation citizen and a member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. I am an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I'm a planning committee member for this workshop. Welcome back to our webinar today. We'll now begin session 2, which is focused on cultural strengths, which we already started to hear during the first session. We know our community and cultural strengths are foundational to wellness and will provide an important context for this webinar series. Our speakers in this session are Dr. Migas Gonzalez, Dr. Michelle Conjon, and Mr. Yvonne Peter. Full bios and CVs can be found in today's attendee packet. Dr. Gonzalez, I will turn it over to you.
Oh, my gosh. Bonjour, Anishinaabe Dug, Nijwasana Gukwe, Dr. Migas Gonzalez, Indigenous Cause, Wabajashi and Dudame, Dawazaka Gining and Dunjaba, Unakamin Singh and Da, Assistant Scientist, Dijinakade Gema, Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health, Center for American Indian Health, Great Lakes Hub, and Danoki, Nungum. Nungum Nui, Windamage, Ga, Minagu is young, and Gilgachai Awajik. Can do the slide. So today I would love to share the results of a qualitative study in which we interviewed 9 first language speaking elders on the connection between language and well-being. These interviews were done entirely in the Ojibwe language or Anishinaabe language, as you'll hear me use interchangeably. And they were transcribed in Ojibwe, and then they were translated into English as well. And those English translations were worked on with elders as well. I want to share those results with you in this metaphor of a path to well-being. The first piece here is the person. So the person or the spiritual being that is walking along this path. Those elders talked about fully embracing our Anishinaabe identity and how important that is, that we were given all the things that we possibly need to live a good life. I'm going to, throughout this talk, share some quotes. I know that's sometimes hard in a presentation format, but I really wanted to let these elders lead, and anything they said is much more beautiful than anything I could say. So I'm going to mix those in as we go. This first quote is, "Since the identity of our spirit is Anishinaabe, we must take special care of that spirit of ours and pursue everything we were given as a people, especially our language. It is that which is helpful and brings peace to our spirit. When Anishinaabe abandon their teachings and language, they are doing a disservice to their spirit within. It's as if they're starving their spirit when they're not pursuing our teachings that were meant to carry us over those hurdles in life. When the Anishinaabe uses his language and dialogues with others, he is nurturing his spirit. After all, his spirit is Anishinaabe." The other piece of this is that the elders really connected this idea of speaking with thinking and with being. So I wanted to share another quote right away. That's what we should use when we're speaking to each other. When we speak in English, we think in English. When we speak Ojibwe, we think in Ojibwe. We should use it when we speak. Everything we do, we should use Ojibwe. When we speak Ojibwe, it's such a peaceful language. There's that peace coming out again. We have something in common as Anishinaabe. As we speak English, we almost become that white. I just want to say, being white is a protective identity for some people, but the privileges of being white, that identity of white, doesn't serve us as Anishinaabe people, as Indigenous people. It only really serves us as a loss of identity. So those are the kind of the big pieces there in that person. The next thing is the guide. So what guides us on this journey? Number one, of course, is our language, but that our understanding the language is a precursor to understanding other teachings and other aspects of our life. There's so many places in which we use our language exclusively, including our ceremonies, our origin stories, our oral histories and creation stories are done in the language. And so being able to understand the language and being able to understand what's there is really going to help guide us. Another quote here. He says, by using their Ojibwe every day, what happened was that knowledge embedded in the language was passed down to the children. It was through the language that they taught their children to have respect for everything on this earth and to treat other living beings respectfully. So there's really key that there's teachings that are embedded in the language that are never blatantly stated. And we're not saying these are the teachings, they're just in the language that can't be separated. And so during these times and in ceremonies or during our storytelling, the speaker will translate those things into English, but oftentimes it's a summary. And even if it is like a sort of word for word, there's things that get lost in that translation. And the other piece of this is just that importance of having a deeper understanding and a deeper belief. One of the elders talked about, he was a veteran and then he came home and he was doing all the things that he was supposed to be doing, we thought he was supposed to be doing, and yet he still wasn't really happy. And so like he had went to one of his elders and asked I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And that elder had told him, like, do you know why we do the things we do? And he was like, man, I guess I'm not really. And so he's like, well, we'll find that. And then he said, once he found that deeper meaning and that deeper belief, he said, that's when things started getting better. That's when he was having nightmares. That's when those nightmares went away. He said, quote, I was becoming Indian again. I was becoming Anishinaabe again. That's a whole becoming again. The next piece is the endpoint. So if we're on this path, we're on this journey, like what are we walking towards? And the elders talked so beautifully about this like different definition. And they didn't say it specifically, but they're like talking about a different definition of success, of economy and wealth and well-being. So two of the elders, all the elders were done separately, but two of the elders, they did everything together. So they did their interview together. So this is a quote from them. The one woman said, today they want everything. They wish for everything. They think that's the good life. If they knew how the Anishinaabe lived a long time ago, maybe they wouldn't think that way. And the other lady responds, she says, that's right. They want everything. They're copying the white people who want everything they see. These are the same ladies that in their interview, they were like, sometimes people ask us if we were poor back in the day. And they were like, we were not poor. We were poor. We were Anishinaabe. Like there was everything that they needed was provided for them when they were living that life and when their community was living that life. It had a different meaning. So other things that exist in this idea of well-being are and tied to our language are good feelings. They talk about all the good feelings that exist in our language, again, that we don't talk about, but they just are there. They talked about unconditional love, happiness, joy, and peace, like you heard already in a couple of them. Well-being was this spiritual health. It was the health of our relationships and the strength of our communities. And it was a long, healthy life. These others tied speaking our language with living long lives. They're like, when we spoke our language, we lived old ages. So it was this last quote I'm going to read of this part anyways. They said, if we start doing that, living well, things will start getting better. We will become Anishinaabe again. And there's that piece of becoming, but the other piece of that I really loved about this quote is that it reminded me of how many times like the elders just weren't separating living well and living our traditional ways. Like they were just used interchangeably throughout all of the interviews. The next piece here is the path. So this literal path that we're walking on. And the big piece here is that we are complete. We were given everything that we needed to live a good life. This quote is, the Anishinaabe must have absolute faith in the way the spirits wanted us as a people to live. We were put on this earth to be complete in our Anishinaabe existence as we can. It was out of care and love for their Anishinaabe that those spirits decided to give us our way of life. So it's the idea that like we don't need to create a new path. We don't need to find a new path. We don't need it to lead anywhere that it isn't already leading. Like everything that we possibly need is already there for us, that it was already given. And they talked about it being given like upon conception, like we were our Anishinaabe spirits. And so that's when we were given all of these things. And but there's things that we do throughout our lives, like when we use our tobacco, or when we speak our language, or when we ask our elders for help, or we go through ceremony, like we're given that even more. Or if we've felt as though we've lost it, like we can regain those things. The next piece is the forest. So the forest for me were like all of the resources for wellness that our language provides us and that our way of life provides us. Our mindset and our worldview, again, that's just embedded in our language. Community connectedness. So they talked at length about community connectedness and relationships. And this idea, they're like, when we spoke our language, that how connected we were. Like we don't visit anymore. Like people don't even acknowledge you anymore. But when we do, and when we have those things, like, well, there's a spiritual transmission that happens, or like an energy transmission that happens, that they talked about, that is so important for our well-being. They talked about all the relationships, whether it's person to person, person to wildlife or nature, person to spirit, and it's spirit to spirit. The way in which they talked about even like the practice of giving your tobacco to an elder to ask them for help, like, or putting your tobacco down by a tree to ask the spirits for help, like whatever you need, like that is a powerful thing. Because when we have our elders who have lived this long life, and they've used their tobacco, and they've gone through ceremony, and they've been connected, they've like gathered all these like spiritual helpers. And when you hand them tobacco and that transmission, and you touch their hands with that tobacco, that like they talk about that tobacco going everywhere. Like it goes to all of those helpers, and how powerful that is. I think the last piece here that I want to talk about is the journey. And so the journey is those like literal steps we're taking on this path to well-being, and this path to wellness. Speaking our language, of course. I wanted to talk about this word that our analysts, so I did have analysts, 2 sets of analysts, actually 3 that were second language speakers who analyzed the Ojibwe transcripts. And then I had some 3 Indigenous researchers to analyze the English. But one of the analysts said, this Andone Gewen is the word this elder used, and how much that really encompasses. That word means like seeking. You're seeking things. And the elders talked about when you seek your language, you're not just seeking a way of dialogue or a way of communicating. Like you're seeking so much more. You're seeking the worldview. You're seeking the well-being. You're seeking like the other traditional practices that we have as Indigenous people. And so those are all the ways in which we can sort of like take these steps on this path. Reconnecting with those traditional ways of prayer and healing, harvesting and eating, those traditional ways of parenting and interacting and being in relationships. And of course, that connection, that spiritual connection through prayer and ceremony and taking care of our elders. I want to leave you all with this quote, because I think it really encompasses like why these interviews were so, yes, there was only 9 elders, and yes, there were only 8 interviews, but like how important it is that we go back to our elders and ask our elders for help and advice. So I'm going to leave you with this quote. And so in the beginning of this, she's actually quoting her grandma. So she says, "You should look for the tallest tree, because this is their elder, the trees that are standing around it. This one is their elder, the tree's elder." That's what my grandma said. That's what I try and do all the time. So I've always looked around for the big tree, because that's the one with the knowledge, the one that's going to help us with something. There are lots of ways we can find help that we're looking for if we do it in a good way, not half measured. Take your time. Don't be in a hurry is the teaching. Take your time. Just say what you need when you put your tobacco down. You don't only do it just one time. Hey, yo, igual.